He had never lost a battle, never known defeat. But in the east, he met warriors unlike any he had faced before. Elephants, monsoons, mutiny, and the breaking point of his own legend. This is the story of how India changed Alexander, and where the greatest conqueror in history finally came to a halt. This is March Through History. 326 BC. After a decade of war, Alexander stood at the edge of the known world. He had conquered Persia, stormed through Bactria, crossed the snowy peaks of the Hindu Kush. Now, beyond the river Indus, lay a land ancient, proud, and ready to fight. India. The first to resist him were not great kings, but fierce mountain tribes, the Aspasioi and Asakanoi. They fought from cliffs and fortresses, raining down arrows and stones. Alexander led the charge himself. In one siege, he scaled the walls under fire and took an arrow through the chest. He survived, but the wounds were beginning to show. As he pushed deeper into the subcontinent, the skies opened. Monsoon rains turned the roads to rivers. Armor rusted. Horses drowned. Disease spread. His men, veterans of Issus, Tyre, and Gaugamela, began to whisper. "How far will we march? When will it end?" But Alexander pressed on. At the banks of the Hydaspes River, he met his greatest challenge yet. King Porus stood in his path, a towering ruler commanding tens of thousands of warriors and over 200 war elephants, beasts clad in armor, towers mounted on their backs, a living wall of thunder and tusks. Alexander could have turned back. Instead, he planned an audacious assault. Under the cover of night and storm, he secretly led a detachment across the swollen river, upstream, out of sight. When dawn broke, his army struck like lightning. Greek phalanxes clashed with Indian war elephants. The ground shook. Men were trampled. Sarissas splintered. The battle became chaos. Mud, blood, screaming animals, shattered lines. The elephants went mad. Some crushed their own handlers. Others turned back and stormed through Porus's own ranks. But Porus would not yield. Wounded, surrounded, he fought on atop his elephant, tall, defiant, unbroken. Only when utterly outnumbered did he finally surrender. When brought before Alexander, bloodied and bound, the king asked, "How should I treat you?" "Like a king," answered Porus. And Alexander did. He restored Porus to his throne, not as a defeated enemy, but as a worthy ally. Because for the first time, he had met a man who mirrored his own pride, his own strength. But the victory came at a cost. As Alexander marched toward the Ganges River, news came of a vast coalition of Indian kings preparing for war, armies even larger than anything he had yet faced. And then came the final blow. At the banks of the Bays River, his men refused to go on. They were not cowards. They had followed him across continents, buried their brothers, endured snow, desert, and fire. But now, their hearts were done. They stood in silence. Weapons down, no pleading, no shouting, just a line that even gods could not cross. Alexander raged. He locked himself away for days, refusing to eat or speak. But even he knew the march was over. He turned back, The return journey was brutal. Instead of retracing a safer path, Alexander chose to carve a new one, across the Gedrosian Desert, a barren hell of sandstorms, salt flats, and scorching heat. Men collapsed by the thousands, horses died, camels were eaten alive, and Alexander, once a symbol of strength, now walked beside his men, sharing their pain, their water, their suffering. It was no longer a march of triumph. It was a funeral procession. By the time they reached Babylon, the king who had once stood invincible was changed. Quieter, harder, distant. He began planning new campaigns, Arabia, maybe even Carthage. But he would never leave Babylon again. Alexander died in 323 BC at the age of 32. Not in battle, not by sword, but from fever, exhaustion, and perhaps the weight of his own ambition. Some say he drank himself to death. Others whisper of poison. But those who marched with him knew the truth. Alexander had reached the ends of the world and found no more worlds to conquer. He came to India a god. He left a man. This is March Through History. Subscribe for more stories of warriors, weapons, and the world they fought in.